when the Bible college was here. I went to the Bible college at the Extension campus in Fort Lauderdale, but everything was recorded here. So anyway, pretty much most of what I know about the Bible was taught from right here. And so if there are any problems, this is the address to mail the complaints to. But anyway, if you have a Bible, if you could open it to 1 Kings 19, that's where we're going to be. And last year, my family, I live in Florida, by the way. I pastor a church in Miami. And but we were on vacation at Disney World. And so we live about 3 hours from Disney World, so we go pretty often as I can talk my wife into going to Disney World. But we were there staying at one of the Disney hotels, this hotel that's called the Boardwalk. And behind the Boardwalk, it's on this lake. And so you can rent these Surrey bikes. If you're familiar with those Surrey bikes, you know, you get a few people pedaling, and then you kind of go around. So my daughter, who's was 4 at the time, around the lake. She was around this ocean. And so I'm like, all right. So finally, the last day, we decided to do it. And so and then they had so my wife and I get on there, and there's this little kind of basket, car seat thing for younger kids. So my daughter's 4, she's up front. My son is 2 at the time, he's up front. And so I'm there, and then my wife is 7 months pregnant at the time, and so she's next to me. And so we start pedaling. And so my mic is on mute. How's that? All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad to be here today. I went to Bible college here. So we finally get on this Surrey bike, and we're making the first turn. And what I never realized is that there's like these hills that go up and then come down and all around. And so we get to the first hill, and it is like, I don't know if you ever had this moment, like if you go to the gym. I don't really go to the gym, I just drive by gyms. But anyway, so you get to that, and my legs are just on fire. I mean, they're burning as we get to the top. We get to the top, and then we just, you get like that nice momentum going down, which was just so awesome. And so then we get to the second hill, which is kind of on the other side, which is even steeper than the first hill. And so we're pedaling as hard as we can, and then there's this little bell up front, and so my kids are ringing the bell going, faster, faster. And I'm like, hey, kid, you start pedaling, and maybe we'll go faster. Well, anyway, so we get there. My wife is struggling, and I'm like, come on. And she's like, I'm pregnant. And I'm like, whatever. And so anyway, we finally make it to the top. We go back down. We get to where we started. I'm like, all right, guys, that was awesome, and let's go home. And then my daughter says, Poppy, can we go maybe one more time? And I'm like, yeah, that's not part of the rules. And so my son's like, yeah, one more. So my wife says to me, come on, Bob, we're leaving. Let's just go one more time. So I say, okay. So we get to the first hill again, because we kind of go, it's all in a circle. We get to the first hill, and my wife says, honey, I can't pedal anymore. And I'm like, you can't pedal? We just started this. And, well, nonetheless, so she just says, well, I'll just, sit. And so I, by myself, pedal, just sheer force of will. Cue up the Chariots of Fire music in the background, the Rocky theme, all of those songs playing at once. Anyway, I make it up to the top, get that nice momentum going back down the hill, and then I get to the second hill, which is just, and I get to this point where I just can't do it. I cannot pedal anymore. And then my wife says, listen, I'm going to get off. I'll get off the bike. I'll get off the bike and just walk, and that'll make it easier for you to pedal. And I'm like, honey, but you're pregnant. Okay, get off. And so she gets off, and I start pedaling. And I don't know if you've ever had one of these moments, but I got this burst of energy like nothing I've ever experienced from Red Bull, caffeine, or anything. But it was like, it was incredible. I was just exploding up this hill. And I'm like, man, I really am stronger than I thought. And so I'm going up this hill, and I go to turn to my wife to tell her, hey, look how awesome I'm doing, and she's pushing me up the hill. And I have this horrible feeling because she's 7 months pregnant, pushing me up the hill. And so I'm going to say to her, honey, just stop. But what comes out is keep pushing. And so she pushes me to the top of this hill. But right as we're getting to the top, this family of 4, mom and dad and then 2 teenage girls, they pedal by and they're like, oh, look at that evil man, what he's doing. You know what I mean? It's like that. And then they pedal by, and then we finally get there, and I have this humiliating story to tell you. Now, I tell you all of this because, listen, when you're planting a church, it can feel a lot like pushing the bike uphill. And the only person actually helping you is this 7-month pregnant woman that really can't help you all that much. And sometimes we'll look on. And I don't know, especially in the world of the internet, we can just go on Twitter and everybody's talking about what great things are happening in their church. You go on somebody's website and they're talking about, hey, we just built this building and then we packed it out in 1 week and now who knows what we're doing, and someone gave us $1 million check. What was that all about? And we can look on and kind of think like, man, it would be so much easier if we were that family of 4, and just if it could just be easier. But can I just tell you this, and I think it's important for us to know that that's not where church planters are forged. Church planters are forged, the guys that really plant churches, the guys that last in ministry for the long haul, are not the guys who necessarily had it easy. They're the guys, listen, here's what they do. They simply don't stop pedaling. Because I do want to tell you this. It does, believe it or not, it does get a little bit easier. We started our church 12 years ago. It was my wife and I and 5 people. And I must have said something because one couple didn't come back after the first week. So it was my wife and I and 3 people the next week. And I realized if I keep going in this direction, it's going to be over within the first month. And so, but the thing that's important for us to know is that it does get better, that you do start making the kind of impact that you want to make in your city. When we started Calvary in our city in Miami, I had never read a book on church planting. In fact, I think the only book that was even out on church planting at the time was Ed Stetzer's book, Planting Missional Churches, which came out in 2000. And so there wasn't very much available. I mean, there wasn't a great conference like this to go to. There weren't all of these, websites and resources and blogs and books and all that stuff that comes out. And here's the thing is that the first 18 months of our church, Miami is one of the most unchurched cities in America. And so in the first 18 months of our church, we didn't reach one person that didn't know the Lord. We saw a lot of Christians come, and there were some people who maybe were backslidden, but they knew the Lord. We baptized a few people that have been Christians all their lives, but just kind of had never gotten around to it. And we moved to Miami because we really believed that there needed to be a Bible-teaching church that desired to reach people who were lost. And so after the first 18 months, when we realized that we hadn't reached one person in our city, I mean, it was a depressing moment, to say the least. And after 18 months, I thought I had given it everything. And then it's like, and I'm at that moment where I'm pedaling, and I just cannot pedal anymore. And it's like, well, now what happens? And, and here's what I want to do is kind of tell you some of what happened to me when I was at that point in my life, when I was just so discouraged. And I was 18 months into it, and I thought we hadn't reached one person, and what are we going to do? I look back now, it's been 12 years, and I mean, God has blessed so much. And we see, just hundreds and hundreds of people come to know the Lord now every month at Calvary, and it's an incredible thing. And what I don't want to do is just kind of give you one of those, hey, hang in there, messages, because the hang in there messages are okay, but it doesn't really solve the problem. It doesn't solve maybe some things that need to be tweaked or reconsidered or rethought. And so what I want to do instead is just take you to one of my heroes, who's Elijah. And now, I'm most of you know this story, unless you're a youth pastor. This might be the first time you've heard it. No, I'm just kidding. But, you know the deal, right? Mount Carmel, big showdown. And whoever answers by fire, that's the real God. Baal doesn't show up, and then God shows up by fire, and then Elijah gets excited and just kills everybody, which is just pretty awesome. And so what happens is, as you know the story, is that Jezebel hears what happens, And she says, may the gods do to me and more so if I don't make Elijah like one of the prophets that have been killed. And this is the part of the story where then Elijah, who's been able to stand up to all these prophets, runs away because of what this evil woman has said to him. And, here's the thing. And I don't think it's Elijah's fear of Jezebel that causes him to run away. Instead, I believe he ran because there's another problem. I believe he's the guy, and this is one of the things that he says over and over. I'm the only one left. He says, I'm the only guy peddling here. This is the problem, God. And that's why his desire is, I've been doing this thing, and now, God, this is my prayer. Please kill me. Because this is just bad. I don't want to peddle anymore. And then what happens to him when he hears the Lord speak to him is what I want to zero in on. So let's start in verse 1. We'll read a few verses, and then I'll share some things with you if we can. It says, and the Lord spoke, and Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had executed all the prophets with the sword. And then Jezebel sent a message to Elijah saying, may the gods do to me and more so if I do not make your life as one of them by tomorrow about this time. When he saw that, he arose and ran for his life and went to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree, and he prayed that he might die, and said, it is enough, Lord, now take my life, for I am no better than my fathers. Then, as he lay and slept under a broom tree, suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, arise and eat. And he looked, and there by his head was a cake baked on coals and a jar of water. And so he ate and drank and lay down again, and the angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you. And so he arose and ate and drank, and he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights as far as Horeb, the mountain of God. And there he went into a cave and spent the night in that place, and behold, the word of the Lord came to him. And he said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? And he says, I've been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts, for the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword, and I alone am left, and they seek to take my life. And then he said, go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore into the mountains and broke the rocks into pieces before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. But afterwards, after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. And so it was, when Elijah heard it, that he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood in the entrance of the cave. And suddenly a voice came to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? And he says, I've been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts, because the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword, and I alone am left, and they seek to take my life. And if you pause there and give me your attention, there's a couple of things that I want to share with you. The first thing that I want you to note is that there's a question that God asks Elijah, but he asks him twice. He says, what are you doing here, Elijah? And he gives God the same answer, as though like, all right, Lord, I don't know if you heard me the first time, but this is kind of what was going on. And, Elijah hears it. These people are trying to kill me and, whatnot. And so then God asks Elijah the same question. I mean, what are you doing here? And I mean, can I ask, how many of you have kids, if I can ask that? Now, all right, most of us. How many of you, when you ask your kids a question, you ask them the same question the second time because you were satisfied with the answer to the first question? So it's like, hey, what are you doing? Well, I'm doing this. What are you doing? So we don't ask a second time because we were satisfied with the first answer. My daughter is 5. She loves Star Wars. And that's because I'm training her to be a nerd like me. And so while we were at Disney World this last year, the whole thing with the bike or whatever, we were there. And there's this thing you can sign up for, and I think they have it in Disneyland where you can actually do this thing. It's called the Jedi Training Academy. I signed up, and then they said you have to be 12 or under. Anyway, it's a little kind of upsetting. But but my daughter got to be part of it, and then you get to fight Darth. They do some Jedi training, and then you get to fight Darth Vader. And so we taped it, and she got this awesome video of her fighting Darth Vader. It's pretty cool. And so anyway, in the weeks prior to this, of course, I was training her. And I would tell her, I am the Jedi and you are the Padawan learner. And so we kind of had this thing that we were doing, and she would say, yes, master. And, so it's like, if you're just your mom could call me that, that'd be better. And but we say that because she's not here. And, so there was one day that after I'd get home from the office, we have a couple of lightsabers in the house, because doesn't everybody have a couple of lightsabers in their house? And so we would do this and kind of practice lightsabers, and, and then I would quote lines from the movie. And anyway, it's the nerd-o-meter is really going off here. So anyway, there's one day that I couldn't practice with her. I'd gotten home, I was in the middle of something, and I said, I can't. And so she says to her, my daughter, his name's Mia. So Mia says to her younger brother, Xander, who's 2.5 or so, she says, Xander, you practice with me. And he says, okay. So he's holding the lightsaber, and then she says, all right, I'll be the good guys, and you are the Sith Lord that I have to destroy. So I have to defeat you. So they're playing, and so she hauls off and just whacks him on the head. And then he comes running in, and crying because, her sister has attempted decapitation with this play lightsaber. And so I say to her, and I say, Mia, if you hit your brother again, I'm going to take the lightsaber, and you're never going to see it again. And she says, you want to let me do whatever I want. And you ever have one of these parenting moments where what your kids are doing is absolutely hilarious, but you are able to hold back the laughter? That was not one of those moments. I just couldn't stop laughing because I thought it was hilarious. And I'm like, Mia, I'm like, what did you say? She's like, I said, you want to let me do whatever I want. And it's like, no, see, when I asked the second time, it's not because I was pleased with the first answer. And I said, oh, and by the way, Jedi mind tricks don't work on me. So that's the other thing. And so this whole point is that God is trying to get Elijah to this place. Like, what are you doing here? Well, I'm the prophets, and they were forsaking the covenant, and I'm the only guy left, and they're trying to kill me. And this whole thing is okay, what are you doing here again? Well, there's this whole thing, and here's the thing. He's trying to show Elijah something, that you don't solve your problems by running away from them. You don't solve your problems by complaining about them. You don't solve your problems simply by hoping that they're going to go away. Instead, what God does is he tells this prophet to do 4 specific things, to get out of the place of discouragement and to keep moving forward in what God has called him to do. And this is of particular interest to those of us who are pastors, particular interest to those of us who are planting churches. Look at what he says in verse 15. It's just so huge. He says, then he said to him, to Elijah, go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arise, anoint Hazael as king over Syria. What is he telling him to do? I want you to go outside of Israel. I want you to anoint this pagan king and make him king over his area. What is the application for us? Here's what it is. Listen, focus on reaching lost people. Focus on reaching lost people. You see, Elijah is so upset that God's people have gone astray that he has to remind him what it's all about. Why did God call you in the first place? Well, because there's all these people that are lost in this city, and that's why I wanted to come here. Okay, so here's what I want you to do, Elijah. Go start reaching one. Just reach one of these guys and see what happens. You see, God called Israel, as you know, to be a light to the nations. And they lost sight of that. And we can lose sight of that as well. God's called our churches to reach our community, to reach our cities that don't know the Lord. But listen, that's not what discourages us. What discourages us a lot of times is what happens to Elijah when God's people don't do what they're supposed to do. Listen, if you're a church planner, if you've already planted your church, you're like maybe, you've been involved maybe 6 months or more, or you've been pastoring for a long time. We've all had this moment that we're all like, that's it, I quit. I'm turning it over, I'm done. And it's all because like 3 volunteers didn't show up. And they're like, I can't believe these people. They said they'd show up and they didn't because there's a football game. And that's it, I'm done. And it's like you got to kind of throttle back a little bit. And you're like, okay, you're going to quit because 3 people went to go see the Dolphins? They went to see the Dolphins for crying. Isn't that punishment enough? And listen, what God tells Elijah to do is just get back to doing what you're supposed to be doing, reaching the Hazaels of the world, reaching these people that don't know the Lord, because it's hard to be discouraged. I mean, you got to really work at it. You got to work at being discouraged when people are getting saved in your church every week. And so, yeah, maybe some people didn't show up. All right, well, they're going to see the Dolphins, so that's, well, whatever. But there's just great things happening. When people are being saved in your church and people are taking next steps in their faith. I had a guy come up to me a couple weeks ago in our church. It was this guy's name. His name is Billy, and Billy was telling me this story. He came to the Lord in our church a couple years ago, but he has these two friends, a guy named Don, a guy named Marcos. They both play racquetball together every Sunday afternoon, 3 p.m. That's their appointment. They have this standing. They're great, good buddies, and so they work together, and they have this standing racquetball appointment every day. So they're talking on the phone on Sunday morning, like, hey, what are you doing? Well, I'm going to, I got something in the morning, and then I'm going to go, I'll meet you at racquetball at 3. All right, I got something in the morning too. Well, what they didn't realize was that the thing they both had in the morning was they had both been invited to Calvary to some friends. So they come to our church, both of them, not sitting on opposite sides of the auditorium. They didn't realize. They were showing up for the first time. Where they met each other was when I gave the invitation, both of them came forward. And they looked and were like, dude, what are you doing here? I'm getting saved. What are you doing here? I'm getting saved too. And they just embraced in this place, like, man, what an amazing thing. And listen, I tell you this is because it's the stories like this that we hear that just remind us what it is that we're doing. And listen, there's going to be people, believers, that don't do what they're supposed to do. There's going to be people that disappoint us. There's going to be things that happen. But listen, if we just focus on just doing the thing that God called us to do, that there are people who don't know the Lord that need to hear the gospel, that need to be saved, that listen, we will experience the joy of ministry again. There's a second thing that he says to Elijah in verse 16. Look at what he says. He says, also you shall anoint Jehu, the son of Nimshi, as king over Israel, and Elisha, the son of Shaphat, of Abel Meholah, and you shall anoint as prophet in your place. Here's the second thing I want to tell you, and that is this. Start investing in other leaders. And we did a whole workshop on this yesterday, but the second thing that Elijah is told to do is to anoint this guy Elisha as prophet in his place. Listen, Elijah felt alone in the work. And the thing that God tells him to do is raise up another leader, a guy who would not only serve alongside of him, but eventually succeed him as the prophet in Israel. And guys, I'll tell you this, that one of the reasons that we get discouraged is because we're doing the work alone. And I'm going to talk a little bit about forming friendships and all that in a bit, but I want to talk for a moment, if I can, about raising up leaders in your church to help you with the work. There's this old saying that fatigue makes cowards of us all. And it's easy to get discouraged when you feel like you're the only guy pedaling. You're the only guy that cares. You're the only guy that's putting his hand to the plow. My encouragement to you is simply this. Look around at those who are committed to the Lord, who love you, who love your church, and intentionally invest in them. One of the things that we do as pastors, without even realizing it, is that we tend to give all of our time to people who complain. Oh, this person's griping. Let me go spend 2.5 hours with them to listen to those gripes. And it's like, well, I could do that, or we could spend some time raising up leaders. Because you know what the weird, interesting thing is about people who complain? They never have just one thing to complain about. You ever notice this? They have a whole arsenal of things. And it's like, now that I've dealt with this issue, there's 4 or 5 other things about you that bother me that I'd like to talk about one at a time. And it's like, you know what? We're just not going to spend a lot of time dealing with and giving a lot of our time to complainers. Because all this is going to do is discourage you. Instead, listen, love everybody. We're called to love everybody. But you want to move with the people that you can invest in, that really want to change, that really want to grow. Because listen, when you invest in someone, and you know this to be the case, the people that you invest in and you see the Lord working in their lives, you're energized when you see them grow. When you invest in a guy and you spend time with him, maybe he's going to fill in for you in the pulpit, and you work with him on his first message, And then you're there when he gives his first message. I mean, he just kills it. And you're like, oh, and you're cheering him on. Listen, these are some of the sweetest times in ministry. And this is why, listen, this whole, Jethro talking to Moses, hey, you're going to wear yourself out. We've got to be strategic. We can't give everybody equal time. We've got to be strategic as to who we give our time to. And that's one of the things that we do at Calvary, and we have a very, strategic system, and it's just part of the culture of our church that we have a system for developing leaders at every level. We have a system for giving leaders at every level in our church. From if you're serving as a greeter to if you're running a ministry or you're on staff at our church, we have a system and a pipeline for just continually investing in people. The reason is this. Is because leadership development is something that isn't really difficult to do. The problem is, it's also not that difficult not to do. Because it's not an area of ministry that screams for your attention. Nobody's going to call your church and say, yes, hi, can I talk to the pastor? What's it in reference to? I just want him to invest in me. Right? That's probably not going to be the phone call that you're going to get. You're going to have some kind of crisis thing of why people call. But what happens is, because let me say this, and I think this is an important thing. Especially if you're planning your church. One of the most dangerous things that we can do is put people in positions of leadership based on their character, based on their potential, and not on proven character. You see, this is so difficult when you're planting your church, because there's like 20 people, and this guy at least shows up, fairly regularly, and we're saying, well, man, maybe we can get him to do something, and sometimes. Listen, as pastors, can I just tell you this? And I work with like hundreds and hundreds of pastors all the time, not just speaking, but coaching them and all that. And here's the thing that I see as a fairly universal gift that pastors have. We have an ability, I believe, given to us by the Lord, to see the potential in people, to see everything that a person can become if they would fully give themselves to the Lord. You know what the challenge is for us as pastors? Is that sometimes we will make decisions about people based on the potential, not based on their proven character and what they've done. And that is such a challenge for us. And one of the things that will happen is that we will make this decision, and we'll put somebody in a position of leadership, and they're not doing it. And so not only do we have to do what we're called to do, but we've got to kind of drag them in the process. Well, come on, let's do it. And what happens is that we get tired, we get discouraged, because these people they just won't walk for themselves because they just weren't ready. And that's why I said, listen, you got to love everybody, but move with the movers. And give your best energy to those who are committed to the Lord, and the weight of ministry will be much more manageable because there are many more leaders who are carrying the load. That's what God tells Elijah to do. You see, I want you to take Elisha, make him the prophet. He's going to succeed you, and you guys are going to serve together. He says this in verse 17. He says, and it shall be that whoever escapes the sword of Hazael, Jehu will kill. Whoever escapes the sword of Jehu, Elisha will kill. And if you pause there, here's the third thing I want to tell you. And that is this. Remember God's infinite resources. You see, he thinks that Elijah's like, everybody's trying to kill me. And God says to him, hey, listen, here's the deal. If anybody's trying to mess with you, here's what's going to happen. Whoever escapes from this guy's going to kill. Somebody escapes from this guy's going to wipe him out. You're going to be okay. When we started our church, we started in September of 2000. And I mean, we had no money, no people, and no clue as well as to how to start a church. And so let me just say, if you're starting from zero, listen, you've got a friend who's started from zero also. And it can be discouraging to not have the resources that you want to do. And you say, man, well, we want to rent this space to have services. And they say, well, all right, it's going to be X amount. And you're like, all right, is that a month? They're like, no, that's an hour. You're like, what? And okay, maybe we won't meet there. Maybe we can find an old Taco Bell and meet there. And here's the thing that's important for us to note, is that I believe one of the things that God does early on is remind us that he's the one that owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. I believe one of the reasons that it's hard in the beginning is because God is showing us that the one that we need to depend on is him. When we started our church, we had no sound system. I served an assistant pastor for several years at Calvary Chapel of Fort Lauderdale, and where my main responsibility was running the Bible college and doing several other things. But when we started, I had said, hey, can I borrow like this small sound system? And they said yes. And then about 3 weeks into it, they said, hey, we're really sorry, but we kind of need it back. And so I said, okay. And I drove it in on a Tuesday. And so I gave it back. And I remember sitting and thinking, like, I don't know what we're going to do this Sunday. We were about 3 or 4 weeks into it. We had about 50 or 60 people coming. And I thought, man, I don't know what we're going to do. We don't have any kind of sound system and whatever. And I remember, and then it was like Wednesday and nothing, and then Thursday came around. And I got this call on my cell phone from a friend of mine who also pastors in Miami. And he said, hey, Bob, can you come by at some point today? And I said, sure. For what? And he said, well, there's all these boxes that got delivered to our church that have your name on them. UPS just delivered these 5 huge boxes, and they all have your name on them. And so I said, all right. So I went down. So it was probably, 7:30 at night. I drove down, and they were sent from this company in California. Well, anyway, it turns out there's this guy whom I've never met. To this day, I've never met him. But heard from somebody who heard from somebody who heard from somebody that we were starting a church. And he thought, that guy probably needs a sound system. And then he mails the stuff. He didn't mail it the week we started. He didn't mail it the second week. He didn't mail it the third week. He mailed it 2 days after I had to return that one. It's Thursday night, and I'm freaking out, wondering how in the world are we going to be able to do this? And what's cool? We still use part of that sound system to this day. And it's not because it's like, the stuff is 12 years old, but we will always use part of that sound system sometime, somewhere, because every time I see a piece of it, it just reminds me that God has resources that I know nothing of. And that's one of the things that God is showing Elijah in this passage, is that he's behind the scenes working on things that we couldn't possibly imagine. When my wife and I were praying, and I know some of you guys are praying about starting a church, and you're here because you think, I feel God's calling me, but I don't know where. When my wife and I were praying about going and starting Calvary, we had we hadn't told a soul about what we were praying about. We felt like God was calling us to go to Miami. And what's interesting is, my wife and I talked, and we said, we think that God's calling us to Miami. Let's spend a few days just praying and fasting and seeing what God would show us. Probably about 2 days into our fast, I get an email from Bob Coy, who was my pastor, and it's a forwarded email, and all he wrote was, you should pray about this. So I scroll down, and it's this guy who lives in Miami. And he says, hey, we used to come to Calvary Fort Lauderdale. We moved to Miami, and there's like no church here that's like Calvary. And do you have an assistant pastor or somebody who's praying about starting a church that maybe would want to come to Miami and start a church? Well, I got that, and I showed my wife, and I printed that email out, and that was like scripture to me. What? And it was one of those. Seriously, it was crazy because, and people say to me, I wish God would email me. Tell me what he wants me to do. I've had God email me. It's awesome. It's awesome. And I still have that email. And it's just, and so the whole thing is this, is that, when you're praying about where to go, when you're thinking about what do I do, you just want to look for those divine appointments where God is orchestrating things, and be encouraged in this, that God hasn't left you alone. He hasn't left you alone in this. Instead, he has resources we haven't even considered. Now, what I do want to do, let me just share the exact opposite of that if I can. Because I tell you the story about the sound system, and here's what can happen in our minds. I know if I need a sound system, it'll just magically appear. And let me give you the flip side of this that I think is very important. We have to teach the people that we lead, the people that we pastor, what God has to say about stewardship. And that honoring the Lord with our finances is basic Christianity. It's not like 201 or 301 level. This isn't graduate level stuff. This is basic, 1101, stuff about the faith. And sometimes, especially when we're planting a church and we want people to come in and we want people to love it. And we say, man, it's just, maybe this is kind of a taboo subject. We don't want to talk about it. I didn't talk about stewardship for the first 2.5 years of our church. And when I finally did, I was teaching through Philippians. I got to the end of Philippians, and I spent 40 minutes apologizing for what the Bible has to say about stewardship, about tithing, and about all of this. And what it all came down to, and this is, it all came down to the fact that I didn't want to be lumped in to the Christian TV crowd, which, by the way, I believe is neither Christian nor TV. But here's the thing, is that, and I remember after teaching that message that one of my assistant pastors came into my office, and he said to me, he said, Bob, can I ask you a question? I said, yeah. He said, do you enjoy tithing? I said, of course. I said, I believe that tithing and honoring the Lord with my finances is one of the most important decisions I've ever made in my life. And he says, then can I just submit to you that why are you robbing God's people of the same privilege? And I thought, oh man, that was for real. And I was convicted in that moment. And I realized that the fact that, well, we're not going to talk about money here, had much more to do with my ego and not wanting to be connected to a group of people and not wanting to be misunderstood. And man, let me tell you something. When we got serious and we said, hey, you know what? That God's mission is financed by God's people. And we just said, you know, we just need to honor the Lord with our resources. Things just began to change in our church. We were able to now support missionaries that we weren't able to support before, to bring on staff that we weren't able to bring on before, to now be able to get the facility that we weren't able to get before. And so the stewardship is something that we teach on every year. It's a very basic thing that we teach on. And we do the real, not just talking about it from from just a scriptural perspective, obviously, from the pulpit, but we talk to people real practically in workshops and seminars that we do, helping people get out of debt and honor the Lord with their lives and that. And the whole point is this: God wants to provide for your church. God wants to provide for your church plant. And God's going to do supernatural things that you just have no idea what God is doing. And at the same time, God will also provide for your church through God's people as they give to the Lord faithfully. Well, one more I want to tell you. This is in verse 18. He says, yet I have reserved, this is God's last thing that he says, so, yet I have reserved 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. And here's the other thing I want to tell you. Church planners, seek out life-giving relationships. The last thing that God tells Elijah is this: you are not alone. You think you're the only one, but there's actually 7,000 people who are still following the Lord. One of the things that I've seen in so many church planners that I work with that I think is the big occupational hazard of church planning is guys that are just trying to do it alone and they have no real friendships. I mean, I think that's true in general for pastors and senior pastors in particular, that they have very few real friendships. And guys, the truth of the matter is that you can't last in ministry long term doing it by yourself. You need people in your life that you can just go see a movie with, that you can just go to a baseball game with, and you don't have to be their counselor, and you're not talking about some people that you're just their friend. They're just your friend, and I'm not talking about like your Facebook friends. Listen, I have people that I'm friends with on Facebook that I can't stand. And like there's the guy who was my arch nemesis in high school, friended me on Facebook. And I was like, all right. He needs Jesus. I still can't stand him, but he needs Jesus. And plus, the other thing is, anyone who invites you to play Farmville is not your friend. All right? I'll tell you that. And listen, and I'll be honest with you, I think this is the toughest thing for me, personally. My closest friends live outside of Florida. And so I don't get a lot of time with them. I mean, one of the guys, Bill, if you were here for my session with Bill, Bill's one of my best friends in the world. And we talk every week, on the phone, usually talking about politics, complaining about the government, which is always a good time. But we talk every week. We don't get to see each other all the time. And so that's why this was such a great time to be able to spend some time together. But you just need somebody, you need somebody that's just your friend. And that's it. And listen, if you're pastoring close to where maybe you grew up or where you're a part of a church and you're going down the road to start a church, that might not be an issue. Those of us that are maybe you're like me, you just kind of parachuted in somewhere. I think it's a little bit different. You got to find somebody to watch your kids so you and your wife can go out, because what we're doing is not easy. Church planting is not easy. Anybody who tells you it is has never done it. Or they say, "Oh, I watched a show on TV." No, you didn't, because it's hard. And the important thing for us is that we will not be here in 3 years if we haven't built just life-giving friendships, relationships that just replenish us and build us up. Listen, we spend our entire lives giving out. You wake up and you might have the same bad habit that I do. You wake up, you grab your phone, and you check your email. Like, what kind of a demented person does that? That's what I do. And then, so from the set, you've been awake for 45 seconds, and you're already responding to somebody who needs something. And it's pretty much like that all day long, right? And then you get home, and you want to invest as much as you can in your wife and in your kids, and then you just, you get in bed, and you're just wiped. And then you wake up, you open your eyes, and you grab the phone, and here you are, you're doing the same. And you're just, it's like you're living in Groundhog Day, and you're Bill Murray. Ned, is that you? Ned Ryerson? You're, for the 4 people that got that joke. And so and this whole thing, listen, every week I hear about guys who go to plant a church, and they've packed it up, and they're going home. And do you know, it's never because I talked to a guy who left, and he says, well, it's just preaching was too hard. Never said that. I never heard that. Well, it's finding that facility was just so difficult. That's not it. Do you know how hard it is to file a 501c3 with the IRS? That's usually, that's impossible. But that's not the reason they go home. They go home because they felt alone, and they just gave up. And they thought what Elijah did. I'm the only one left. And they lost hope, and they just went home. And they didn't realize that there's 7,000 who haven't bowed their knee to Baal, whose lips haven't kissed him, that you've got to seek out those people. Listen, church planting is hard, but it doesn't have to be impossible. Those of you guys that you're sending out planters, can I just encourage you in this? I just set appointments with myself. The guys that we send out, I just send appointments with myself. Reminders, like you got to call this guy. Because he might not call you. Because he's thinking, man, he's so busy, he's doing all this stuff, and I don't want to be a bother to him. And listen, I just make it a point that I call the guys that we send out, and I want to know how they're doing. And I'm saying, hey, just what's going on? What's happened? And I just say, hey, we're just going to, every month, every 2 months, we're going to talk. And we're going to see how it's going. Because the bottom line is this. If you notice this in Elijah's life. He does what God tells him to do. And we never see Elijah back in the same place where he was. He just starts getting involved. He starts reaching people again. He starts raising up leaders. He's training Elijah again. He starts seeing God do these amazing things with these infinite resources that he has. He finds these 7,000 that haven't bowed their knee to Baal, and there's fellowship that happens. And listen, here's the thing. When I talk to guys that are discouraged and beat up and they want to go home, it's usually one of these 4 things. And here's the thing that I want to tell you, that your city needs you to be a healthy minister. Your city needs you to have a healthy marriage. Your city needs you to have a healthy church, and that begins when you realize that the hill that you're climbing isn't easy, but we aren't pedaling alone. Let me pray for you. Lord, thanks so much for your word. Thanks for encouraging us. Thanks for the mission that you've given to us, this great commission. Thank you for owning the cattle on 1,000 hills. Thank you for calling us. And God, if you've called us, we know that you've also enabled us. You've equipped us. So God, may you do that work. Bring along those people in our lives that can help us in the work, but also that can just be friends to us as well. So that guys can experience the joy of ministry, even when it's tough. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.